Grandmama used to pray, oh Lord, please save them from the evil snares and all the dangers that entangle. Yea, though they walking through the valley of the shadows, just prepare and make them fit for every battle, because I know they bound to come, and I know they bound to fall, but in your bounty, Lord, preserve their beautiful. Right, we still survive and offer grandma's prayers, surrounded by the jungle and the lion's den. Tread light, cause these traps is inconspicuous. They hide right in plain sight, thinking we don't see them when they linger. Look right beneath the surface, then leave a trail of corpses. Crisis, prices, your life a disposable commodity, like living in this fantasy, conditioned to believe that the system even cares whether selling CDs or walking or driving or reading. Look, they don't even need a reason, it's just you breathing and being black. When it's such a pretty fall, it don't seem like we falling at all, at all. It's just a GMO dream, where things are never really what they seem. Please cue the violins, tell them just to play me something pretty, cause this gritty city got me screaming bloody murder. So they got me screaming. This gritty city got me on some. Look, get your hand up on my pocket. Distraction, so lazy they use the same tactics, like condom with some trinkets. Just don't let them get to thinking. That light bulb gets a blinking. You know niggas and ideas. Oh dear, my dear, you may not know me, but I know you very well. Foresight, they say hindsight is 20/20. Well, tell me something, we gotta see that history is on repeat, and maybe it takes a beat and a melody to speak a little louder than the message in the clouds or the essence in the air. I swear, my God is just so clear that a system driven by fear can never give us nothing but more of the same things. Oh, when it's such a pretty fall, it don't seem like we falling at all. It's just a GMO dream, where things are never really what they seem. Please cue the violins, tell them just to play me something pretty, cause this gritty city got me screaming. It's murder. Got me screaming, got me. This gritty city got me on song.
What's happening? RSTV, we're in the building. We're getting it started nice and early on the Monday morning. We setting it off. It's a lot going on. We already know it's a lot going on. It's always a lot going on. I haven't been on the screen for a minute. I know some of you know that. Some of you may have noticed. Some of you may have not. It's okay. I'm back. And I'm black, and I'm African, and all that good stuff, and we're ready for revolution. This morning, today, Monday, Slave Labor Day, I wanted to start the month off right. We're just coming up out of Black August. A lot of history going on in the September month. We will be talking about the Attica Rebellion, which will be coming up soon, as well as a number of other situations that have taken place during this month of September. I wanted to start my show off this month with a couple OGs that I respect, because as we know, you have the situation going on in Niger and so many other places on the continent. It's Africa versus imperialism, hard body today. And we want to definitely address that, but we wanted to start off domestically and talk about some of the issues that's going on around police terrorism. And one of the most egregious acts as of late is the murder of a young sister, 21-year-old, who was fatally shot outside of a Kroger in Columbus, Ohio, in the Blendon Township. And, she was just totally, shot, killed. They accused her of shoplifting or whatever. And, so we wanted to, like I said, I wanted to bring on a couple brothers. I bring in on a few vets. My man, Dhoruba Bin Wahad, folks who aren't familiar with him, he is a veteran Panther, veteran BLA member, freedom fighter, period. And we say veteran because sometimes folks get it twisted and they talk about former as if someone dropped out or something. We don't respect movement dropouts around here. We're not talking to people that talk about what they used to do and all that type of stuff. We want to know, what are you doing right now? Along with Dhoruba, we have a good brother I've known quite a while that's been putting in serious work, organizing on all fronts. He is a veteran fighter as well. He is one of the coordinators at the Black Alliance for Peace. I believe he is one of the founders, if not the founder. Forgive me for not having all of that information in check. But, you know, we know who he is. He's been around, Ajamu Baraka. But before I bring these two brothers on, for folks who are unfamiliar with the situation in Ohio, I wanted to play a little clip of what took place out there, and we're gonna rumble from there if that's okay with you all. Stand by, be cool, and we about to get it popping in a few seconds. Here we go.
CBS's Nancy Chen reports a lawyer representing the family says the footage shows a, quote, gross misuse of power and authority.
Hey, out of the car, out of the car.
Newly released police body camera footage shows 21-year-old Takia Young, a pregnant woman, repeatedly being told by two police officers to get out of her car last week.
Out of the car.
Young, who is suspected of shoplifting alcohol at a nearby grocery store, refuses to exit her vehicle.
They said your stole stuff, do not leave. Get out of the car. Then get out. No.
Moments later, Young slowly accelerates toward an officer. He then fires once, hitting her in the chest. The officers chase the car as it rolls into a wall and immediately begin medical assistance. Young was later pronounced dead at the hospital. Her baby did not survive. Glendon Township Police Chief John Belford has placed the unidentified officer who fired the shot on administrative leave pending an investigation.
Despite being ordered to get out of the car more than a dozen times, she refused to do so.
I didn't see justification. I saw a young woman get killed.
Attorney Shanda Brown says the Young family watched the video and is demanding an indictment of the officers.
And they're obviously upset and devastated by watching that video.
Nancy Chen, CBS News.
Okay. I'm going to bring in my guests. What's happening, brothers? How y'all doing this morning?
Doing well, Black man. How you doing?
Man, we're live on the right. Yes. So we took a brief look at this at the state's version of what happened, and you can tell, I mean, to a trained ear, trained eye, or anyone that has any type of politics, we're clear that even in the reporting, it was very biased. And they made it look like, okay, this woman, you know, she stole some alcohol or whatever. This pregnant woman, mother of two, 21-year-old might have had. They're saying that she stole some alcohol, and you know, we see how, you know, the pigs addressed her. You know, you had one on the side, you know, yelling, telling her to get the F out the car, whatever the case is, and then the one in the front. Of course, they claim that she accelerated. From what I saw, you know, I saw a woman in fear, like she should be, refusing to get out the car, like many of us would, especially if we didn't, you know, if we haven't committed any quote unquote crime. And aside from that, you know, they talking about she accelerated. I mean, I don't know. I think the car was started and she might have taken her foot off the brakes. It wasn't looking like, you know, she was speeding to knock anybody down. So I wanted to get you all's take this morning and, you know, go from there. I think we'll start off with Dhoruba and then tap in with Ajamu.
Well, thanks for having me on the program, Kalonji. You know, we witness these things over and over and over again. And I don't think people of African ancestry in the United States fully grasp or understand that when the police behave in the fashion that they do, first of all, they feel they have the authority and the right to talk to people any way they want to, especially people of color or black people. They think that they're running everything, that we're supposed to listen to everything that they say without question, that they don't work for us. In fact, they are employed by the public. We don't work for them. They work for the public. They work for the community.
Hey, D, not to cut you off, but your mic is cracking kind of bad. So I'm going to take you off the screen and see if we can adjust that mic. Maybe you can unplug it and put it back in, or just restart if you don't mind, because we're getting.
Well, yeah, let me see what I can do here.
So, John, we're gonna ask you the same question if you don't mind.
African. It's the details of this are they important, of course, but in some ways they're not even relevant, because what we see is a continuation of a certain kind of relationship, a relationship between an occupying army and a colonized people, where the occupying army, representing concentrated white power, have given these occupiers, these military forces, a green light to basically enforce colonial law. They understand that they can in fact use deadly force and with impunity. We saw the slight acceleration. There was no threat to that individual's life, but what that individual saw was an opportunity based on their their training to use deadly force. I mean, he could have stepped out of the way, but instead he knew he had an opportunity to use deadly force within the context of the training he received, and what he probably concluded would be ruled as a justified shooting. So this continues. This relationship continues, and we get outraged, and but what it suggests, and I think we'll talk about it, is that we've got to alter the relationships between our communities, our people, and this occupying force. That's not a easy sort of proposition there, but is one in which we have to really begin to confront, and that means also to developing the conditions, the structures among our people by Black revolutionary forces to be able to take the responsibility of providing public safety, of demonstrating to our people that while we push the enemy out of our communities, we have the ability to serve the communities in ways that are superior to what we see coming from the enemy, but in ways that generate confidence among the population. Because right now, the population, many people still calling for a police force, a police presence in our communities. That's an objective reality. And so, we can respond to these kinds of situations, and we could demand so-called accountability or justice. But essentially, it means we've got to alter the relationship between our people and this occupying force.
No doubt. Let's see if
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep, sound a lot better.
Okay. Ajamu, he succinctly put the finger on where we have to go. We have to change the relationship that we have to the state, so that our condition as a people, as a colonized people, as a domestic colony, is changed. It becomes a relationship that we exert power, and to begin that process, we have to struggle around certain things. And this is one of the reasons why for years I called for community control of public safety and decentralization of the police. And what that has meant was that on the local level, we have to take control of of policing in our community. We have to make sure that policing in our community is accountable to the conditions and the people in the community. Secondly, I also advocated as a means of education, that that addresses what Ajamu was talking about, how sadly we still call 911 for policing because we feel that we need them. One of the reasons that we feel that we need them is because we don't realize that they're armed agents of the state. They do not have our interests or well-being in mind. Their position is to control our community, to protect the property of those who have property in our community, usually exploitive property relationships like absentee landlords and stuff like that. But how do we do that? And this is what Ajamu was referring to, that that's problematical. That's very difficult to achieve. And I think we should begin with carrying forward campaigns that correctly identify the enemy as armed agents of the state who are occupying our community as if they were a foreign army. And to do that, we have to do things like file class actions for decertification of the police union, because the police are not workers; they're armed agents of the state. Now, we may not win such a lawsuit, but the educational benefits of, and the mass educational benefits of a class action that define the police as armed agents of the state is factual. They are armed agents of the state. We can go into their history from the antebellum South, from the antebellum days, from the bullwhip days up until now. This is why the police behave the way they do. I'm quite sure that if it was a white woman sitting in that car and was fearful of exiting the car, they wouldn't have shot her. Okay? They might have tried to smash the glass in, they might have tried to convince her, but definitely, as Ajamu and you pointed out, the police's life was not in danger. He just felt that he could do this because he has authority to do this. All he has to do is say that he feared for his life, and then the courts are going to come up with, the prosecutor was going to come up with, he had reasonable cause to believe his life was in danger. So that's why he shot a pregnant woman in a vehicle that was moving forward at a slow pace that he could have jumped out the way. You see. Now, having said all of that, I think you were well aware that I don't believe that the armed agents of white supremacy who are enforcing the law and murdering us is not doing their job. They're doing their job when they terrorize us. We act like police brutality is something that's exceptional, something that is beyond the pale of law enforcement. It's quite the contrary. The United States military, in the domestic military, are the police. And now we are in the rising fascist moment. We are in a moment when the right and white supremacy have consolidated their power. They have regularized police brutality and murder of people of color. They have demonized immigrant communities of people of color. They have transformed our communities into armed bandistans. So I don't believe that if we brought a campaign to decentralize the police, to decentralize and for community control, and we began to win these things on the local level, which we can, that would change the relationship of the police to the black community. I believe they would become more rabid, they would become more vicious, and they would become more murderous. And I don't believe that even if we did bring a suit to decertify the police unions and have them recertified as armed agents of the state without the privileges or the expectations of a working class people, that would change the attitude either. The culture of policing in the United States, the rise of the white supremacist construct of American political systems is such that the police are the last bastion of power for those who have suppressed and murdered us. We need to really understand that in the final analysis, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun.
No doubt,
And that the militarized police are the gun that's pointed at the head of the black community. So anyone that stands out, anyone that resists, anyone that fails to obey these pigs in blue costume are going to be murdered, are going to be treated differently. And black faces in high places won't change this paradigm of relationship. The only thing that will bring the police into proper into a proper demeanor, a political demeanor, and a social demeanor towards the African community is that we have to have true democracy in America. We have to fight against fascism in America. We have to stand against the rise of fascism under the guise of popularism, of so-called anti-wokeness is carried out by these pigs in Florida or by the Trumpites. We have to understand that before there could be democracy in a society that's built on white supremacy, there first has to be a democratic distribution of the pain. Without a democratic distribution of the pain, white folks don't mind and we don't matter.
No doubt, no doubt. I appreciate that, and definitely that is certainly lacking that distribution of pain. It's like we're receiving it real well. I want to when I think of Ohio, where this young sister was and her unborn child, because we can't forget that part as well, where this sister and her unborn child was brutally murdered. I can't help but think of folks like Tarika Wilson, who in 2008 she was murdered by police in Lima, Ohio, and she was 26 years old, holding her 1-year-old child, who ended up getting the baby got its finger shot off by police while she was holding the baby. The baby did survive, but again ended up being shot at one. I can't help but think about Tamir Rice, whose mother Samira has been on here on numerous occasions. 11, 12 years old, gunned down by police in I believe it was Cleveland. I can't help but think of John Crawford, the young man who was gunned down in the Walmart for picking up an air rifle that Walmart sold. This all took place in Ohio. One of the things that we've been talking about as of late has been not just quote unquote cop city, but cop cities that are sprouting around the country, and not just around the country, but around the world. I want to ask you, Ajamu, how do we combat, in your estimation, how do we combat, because I know Dhoruba talked about everything from decertification of the police unions to decentralization, so on and so forth. How do you see bringing some of that into fruition, Ajamu?
I think one thing we got to do is train our organizers to begin to use language and framework that clearly identifies that relationship, that clearly identifies the colonial relationship and the role of the occupying force. We can no longer sugarcoat this relationship. We have to confront the notion that a colonial power is capable, even if it was willing, to provide something called justice when these kinds of situations unfold. Now, they may sacrifice a pig every once in a while if there's sufficient pressure coming from the public, but that doesn't alter the fundamental ongoing relationship. So we have to arm our organizers with the framework and the language to help to sharpen and what the contradictions already sharpened, but help people to unpackage the contradictory relationship between our people and this occupying force, and be bold and confident in those efforts, and not worry about being labeled as extremists or ultra left or whatever, So that is point one. Secondly, it's not enough just to change and shift consciousness. We've got to build more effective organizations. I know it becomes almost like a cliche calling for more organization, but what else can an oppressed people do than organize itself in order to build its capacity for resistance and for advancing its forces toward liberation. So building more effective organizations is the second and most important point we have to really emphasize. And third, as we build these more effective organizations, we have to find ways to try to unify and concentrate our forces. You know, this is an enormous undertaking to try to bring about radical social change in the United States of America. 'Cause we understand, as our dear brother laid out, that the colonial fascism that we've been exposed to for centuries and in its concentrated form decades is now being experienced by the general public. And that is happening because people have to remember that fascism is no more than in the way it's unfolded in the West, in the northern countries, in the metropoles, is no more than a capitalist reform. It's the effort on the part of the capitalists to maintain their hegemony, and so they understand the shift in power taking place globally. They understand the fragile nature of this economic system, and they have concluded that in order to maintain hegemony, they have to begin to use naked force. And they are preparing for that. That's why we have the cop cities now in Atlanta and now being prepared to expand into places like Baltimore. So we're not going to be able to confront and defeat this expanding fascism unless we build more effective, unified structures, concentrating our power. So these are the things we have to really begin to talk about. And lastly, point number 4 is that it has to be a recognition that in order for this revolutionary process to be successful in the U.S., that we have to build effective relationships between ourselves and revolutionary movements globally. And that is very, very important, not just in terms of propaganda work, but in terms of the structural kinds of support that we can give one another. We've got to push this notion of reciprocal solidarity. And so these are the things we have to really put front and center as part of a revolutionary program in this country.
Right on, right on. Again, I appreciate both of you's commentary on this ongoing matter, this ongoing domestic war. We're talking about, again, 12 to 1,500 people murdered by police every year. So, you know, in the mortal words of Gil Scott-Heron, it ain't no new thing, right? So we know that it's not going to stop anytime soon. Before we hop on to the next topic, I want to ask you, Dhoruba, what are some things that, because I know that Ajamu just mentioned more organizations, coalition building, so on and so forth. What are some things that you think we can do right now that are practical today? Because there are folks, as we know, who have been organizing for years. There's some who have become demoralized. There's people in the community who, as Ajamu pointed out, still call on, call for more police and more policing and all that type of stuff. What are some of your thoughts as far as things we can do right now?
That Ajamu pointed out a number of factors, and I think the first factor that he pointed out is that activists have to become more educated and more articulate to define the demarcation line between ourselves and our interests and the enemy. One of the things that the Black Panther Party was keen on from the very beginning, and why we had political education classes every day, was to define our, what we would call, party line, how we would define the contradictions between, say, tenants and the landlord. How would we talk about the contradictions in the educational area? What did we mean by education that taught us who we were and where we were and how to deal with our situation? Yes, activists have to become more exact in their analysis so that they could present what we used to call a mass line. Now, the mass line was translating those ideals, those revolutionary concepts of empowerment into languages that the people could understand. When we came up with the slogan "Power to the People," it was a simple slogan, but it embodied the relationship of ordinary people to the power structure. The people didn't have power, so power to the people and not the pigs. And the pigs couldn't co-opt that slogan because what were they going to say? Power to the police? The police already had power. So when we come up with slogans with hashtag movements like Black Lives Matter, and then white folks say, and white supremacists say, all lives matter, white lives matter, blue lives matter, or squirrel lives matter, it's because the slogan was meant to encapsulate and hold into thrall the energy of people who were tired and sick of the system. So what Ajamu said about activists have to become much more articulate and clear about who is on what side of the barricades. Where are we? There's a clear demarcation line between what we stand for and what the enemy stands for. And this is why they're our enemy. And also, I think Ajamu pointed out that we have to understand the leverages of power, those things that we can organize around and to create in our community that will express and articulate our community's needs. And we need to organize around that. And that brings us to something as simple as understanding what we mean when we say community control of public safety, where we could use the ballot or the referendum, limited as it may be, on the local level. We know that all politics is local. That's what all the activists say. But how do you manifest those politics locally? How do you organize instruments of empowerment of people who have no power? And if we don't recognize the domestic colonial reality of African people in the United States, then we're going to talk about getting black faces in high places and how that's going to change everything. We know that doesn't change anything. In all of these cases most of these cases where the police have murdered our children and murdered our brothers and sisters, there's a black district attorney who's telling us that he's going to look into all facets of the case. There's a black mayor who's telling us that demonstrations that get out of hand have no place in our society, and then they give lip service to American democracy, saying that there's no place in America for white supremacy. White America is a white supremacist construct. There's no place in America for true democracy, if truth be told. You see, and so when we talk about something like a cop city, and how do we oppose that? Look, it was the whole black city council in the so-called new capital of the South, or the Black South, that voted for Cop City. And then when the masses of people rose up to protest that, they were ignored. They are ignored. Okay, that's because these political representatives, there's no consequence for their behavior. Okay, there's no consequence for them, which brings us to something as quintessential right now to the rise of fascism, is building a united front, building a working class united front, actualizing the Black Panther Party's concept of the Rainbow Coalition, organizing a united front against fascism, against white supremacy. And this united front has to include, or should include, all progressive peoples, revolutionaries and progressives. We don't have to like each other or love each other in order to work in a political alliance, as long as we do so based on principles, based on the understanding of who our enemies are and who our friends are. And this is very important to understand, and this brings me to the last part of what Ajamu was talking about: reciprocal solidarity between oppressed peoples globally. The United States empire and hegemony is in decline, is in deterioration. We see now that the global South is organizing itself, is forming itself into an alternative paradigm of global relationships in terms of BRICS, in terms of understanding the necessity for multipolarity in the third world. But we are faced with a problem because we're living in a white supremacist construct that has outlawed and made it illegal for us to exercise solidarity with certain peoples and certain movements, because they classified these movements and people, as terrorists. You see, they classified these movements and people as terrorists, and therefore, if we try to reach out, say, to the Palestinians or to the revolutionary movements in Palestine, we're told that we're supporting terrorism, and then we're able to be canceled. We see that with the All African Revolutionary Socialist Party, how they've been demonized because of their solidarity and with other organizations, with other people, how their offices were raided, and things of that nature. And also, we see that we have a unique historical opportunity right now at this moment with the independent candidacy of Cornel West running for political office. And when I asked Cornel, was he wasn't going to punk out like Bernie and become a sheepdog for the Democratic Party. He made it clear that he was running to the end. And the purpose that he's running to the end is to build an alternate paradigm to the duopoly of political power, of political institutional political expression, namely the Democratic and Republican Party. I mean, we have the idiocy of Black people turning to a racist dog like Orange Man, like Trump, talking about, yeah, we see why they're prosecuting him now because he was going to dismantle the state and all of this. This is a result of what Ajamu was talking about, a lack of political analysis and an ability for activists to articulate our relationship to status quo power. And so, the candidacy of a Cornel West, whether people like him or not, is an opportunity to organize a third political force in America. It's an opportunity to mobilize a united front against fascism. Whether he wins the presidency or not is secondary. What's primary is to organize a mass united front against white supremacy, fascism, and anti-working class corporate political power. Now, for me, I think the Cornel doesn't go far enough in some of his analysis. But then again, I'm not the candidate, and I'm not trying to speak to a whole lot of folks who don't want to listen. I do believe that the racist and white supremacist right, the so-called Magna crowd, are locked on ignorance. That we could never underestimate the power of plenty of ignorant people. And I think that we do so at our own risk. So I think that supporting any type of effort to organize a political, a united front against white supremacy and fascism is a welcome effort that we should all support. And I think that we should go into history and understand that when we did try to organize the independent Black political party and a Rainbow Coalition, it was the same Negroes that's in the Congressional Black Caucus right now, and many of their progeny, many of their forefathers or ancestors who formed the CBC, who opposed it, who sabotaged it. And so we need to ask ourselves, in real time, why is the Congressional Black Caucus silent on what's happening in Niger? Why are they silent on AFRICOM? Why are they silent on U.S. policy in Africa? Why are they silent on the United States' use of NATO in the Sahel and the overthrow of regimes by NATO proxies? Why are they silent on all of this when it directly impacts on our lives right here in the United States? Because we know that the only reason that the United States has the AFRICOM initiative is to vouchsafe the minerals and the resources of our brothers and sisters in Africa to the detriment of the African people. And so globalization is not just an opportunity for Jay-Z to fly across the ocean and buy a radio station and pump some hip hop into the community or Afrobeat. It's not just about a Boyce Watkins a Boyce, whatever his name is, investing in Ghana. It's not about allowing the political elite in Africa, many of them who don't care jack shit about their people, to pimp us, to pimp the African diaspora and use us in order to empower and maintain their hegemony. So I think that my comrade Ajamu laid out 4 points that if we were to just try to deal with those 4 issues in a principled way, in an upright way, in a forthright way, that we could change or begin to change the powerlessness of our people, and projects like Cop City would become impossible to carry forward or even establish.
Okay. Couple things real quick, because of course we're going to definitely jump into what's going on the continent. I want to point out a few things to the chat and folks who are listening. Please understand, this particular program and our platform as a whole, it's about political education. So when we're talking about political education, we're not jumping up and down saying, okay, electoral politics is the way, simply saying that we have to utilize all tools, because we're clear that the masses are not ready for revolution. You get people jumping up and down talking about what we're going to do, and y'all talking about organizing and all this type shit. Learn. That's the first thing. Study. Get with some folks who can take you to another level. We're not reactionary. We're not going to get on here talking about a bunch of reactionary bullshit that end up getting folks jammed up. And most people that's talking about going to war, if you really knew what war was, your ass wouldn't be talking about going to war. You know what I'm saying? And if it's about that life, you should improve. So let's not go there. But also, I like to say that we be patient with our people, because oftentimes, we're quick to chop their head off if they're not saying the things that we like. It took us a long time to get in the situation we're in right now, and it's going to take us a long time to get up out this motherfucker. So I want to make sure that we're clear on that. Before I go to, I want to point out that there's a link that I just put in the chat with a few different articles that Dr. Joy James, myself, and others put together that you can check out around Cop City, check out around, this whole paramilitary training ground that is increasing and spreading across not just the U.S., but abroad. I want to hop on the topic of what's going on in Niger real quick. And I want to start with you, Ajamu, if you don't mind.
Before you make that transition, can I make one comment on the connection that has to be clearly established between what we're trying to do and what we are up against in the U.S. and where we're getting ready to go now with this conversation on Niger and West Africa and the Sahel. People have to understand that basically revolution is a science. It's being a revolutionary is not about how much you can talk bullshit and posture. Is about serious discipline. Is about serious study. Is about being committed to praxis, which is the dialectical relationship between theory and practice. Okay, we want to be more effective in our opposition. One of the first things one has to come to terms with is trying to make a proper assessment of the objective and subjective conditions. Now, we might be all ready to take on the state directly. The question becomes, do we have the objective conditions, in fact, to do that? Do we have the subjective conditions to, in fact, do that? If we don't have the subjective conditions, that is a critical mass of individuals who have a understanding, a consciousness of the revolutionary process, then the question becomes, how do we build it? And there's different kind of ways in which you approach that question. for example, the Black Alliance of Peace, we understand there can be no peace without justice. We understand there's not going to be peace until we defeat the enemy. But what we have built is a structure that allows the incubation of the development of young radical revolutionaries, okay, to engage in some concrete practice, to be stilled as a consequence of that practice, to study, to engage in the political education process that brother Dhoruba talked about. This is serious business, folks, and so basically we have to approach it in that way. So, the part that we are trying to emphasize now, making the connection between the domestic and the international, isn't that some kind of this cute little bullshit we came up with? We understand that we are up against a global system, and we've got to build under that reality, within that reality. We have to understand how this system operates, okay? So you can't understand what's happening with the domestic army, we call the police, without understanding how these pigs are operating internationally through the military, okay, and through their intelligence agencies, these structures of NATO. These have to be made if you are trying to be a serious revolutionist. You have to understand them because you have to be able to articulate those ideas, to engage the masses in dialogue so we can build that kind of a critical mass of revolutionary consciousness. It means engaging the people, not talking at the people, not ridiculing the people because they may be backward. Everybody who starts off in this process is backward at some point. Your responsibility is to get clear. So I just wanted to lay that out before we make this transition to talk about the situation.
I definitely appreciate that, comrade, because and one thing I would add to what you're saying, because we talk about making a connection. I think that as freedom fighters, as revolutionaries, when we talk about terminology, terms matter. So I think that we should no longer call these motherfuckers the police. We should call them what they are. They are military. They're domestic military. And I think that unfortunately our people oftentimes can't grasp that when you separate the two. You know what I'm saying? The security guard, the security guard at the state building, the Homeland Security, the fucking correctional officer. All these folks are part of military. It's a different level. You know what I'm saying? And I think that people need to be clear about it, because then and only then do I think that connection can truly be made. Because if not, they'll think that, okay, to go to the good cop, bad cop, and well, they're not like this, and they're protecting us and safeguarding and all that shit. It's all instruments of imperialism, and we want to make sure that we keep that in mind. I want to definitely make that connection we were talking about. And I'm sorry, folks, I got to keep muting the mics because I think that we echo for some reason today, but we're going to make sure it's clear. I want to talk about starting with you, Ajamu. What's the current state of Niger, and what's for folks who aren't familiar with what's going on, why is that region so important, and why should France be pushed the fuck out? Pardon my language, folks.
I mean, what we have in Nigeria, what we have in Niger, what we have across the Sahel is the arrested process of decolonization now taking place. It's taking place today because of the shift in the objective forces, that the Africans who are part of the French Empire, and it is an empire that was maintained on the African continent, now find themselves in a situation where they're able to maneuver in a different way. The masses are beginning to are making the argument for and rising up against the French in an argument for liberation, a process that many of the Anglophone and other states went through a few decades ago. Now, we understand that what was won was in fact flag independence. The colonial relationships continued under the form of neo-colonialism. The propping up of a new sector of compradors and national bourgeois elements, largely pursuing their common class interests with the European bourgeoisie, oftentimes though contradictory class interests, because the interests of the international bourgeoisie often clash with that of the compradors from time, the national bourgeoisie from time to time. That was resolved when you had the evolution and elevation of the comprador bourgeoisie. These bourgeoisie that have an interest in perpetuating the global relations of dominance, even in their own countries. So that was the class that served French interests for decades. That situation now is under duress. These forces are being displaced. What appears to be the agent of change at this moment appears to be the military, for various reasons, very complex reasons, in terms of what has happened in those countries in terms of the repression of democratic forces, of revolutionary forces in those countries, so that the seeds of opposition germinated in these militaries. And so we're seeing that as a consequence, again, these objective conditions ripening. We're seeing these military forces taking power, and they are now demanding the French to leave. They have demanded that to a certain extent with the U.S., even though there's some things there we could talk about. But it's clear that they are basically going to demand that the French leave. The French in Niger have said, "Hey, we're not going anyplace." It represented the arrogance of white supremacy, and arrogance we saw and we see in places like Iraq, where the Iraqis have told the U.S. to leave. They said, "We're not going." The Syrians have told them to leave. They said, "We're going to stay here, continue to steal the oil and occupy the territory." So, it's quite clear that these forces, this collective West, they're committed to use force. They're committed to do what they need to do in order to maintain their hegemony. And and African people and colonized people have to understand that, as Brother Dhoruba said earlier, political power comes from the barrel of a gun, and basically material force has to be met with material force, and that's what we're seeing in this part of Africa. But we got to be careful though, because there's some class forces there involved that it may not be as revolutionary as we would like them to be. We don't romanticize these situations because, again, we've got to stay clear-eyed and sober. We can't make errors based on our own subjective desires, okay? So we watch this process very, very closely. But as long as there's a shift, even gradual shift of power away from this pan-European colonial capitalist project, that's a good thing. And I think that's what we're seeing broadly there in West and Central Africa.
Okay. Dhoruba, give us your take.
I think Ajamu hit it right on the head. We can't be delusional and fantastical and think that everything that pops up as anti-French is necessarily anti-imperialist or anti-Western hegemony. I think Gabon is going to probably be the closest, the clearest example of that as that plays itself out. But I think that one of the things that Ajamu pointed out is that there has to be, or there should be, a critical mass that is susceptible to revolutionary organization, that is receptive of strategies and tactics and analysis that can complete the task of removing these neo-colonialists from Africa. There are serious class differences in Africa amongst the political ruling elite and the masses of the people that they rule over. And this is in every country. And we also need to understand of the 54 countries in Africa, all of them have been delineated and their boundaries established by the colonial powers. And they cut across linguistic, ethnic lines, and religious affiliations. I think a reread of Kwame Nkrumah's Conscientism is on the table right now, where Kwame Nkrumah talks about how do we resolve this mass of differences between different peoples in Africa in many regions that have different histories. But one thing that I want to point out, having lived in West Africa since 1993, is that many of the political elites that we see in power today come from the clans and tribes that collaborated with the slavers in exporting us to the so-called New World. So not much has changed in that respect in terms of the differences between certain African ethnic groups and their histories. We have to understand that every group, well, let me put it this way. In order to achieve the type of clarity and the somber understanding of what's going on, I like to use a quote from Alombe Brath, who in many ways mentored my understanding of Pan-Africanism on a whole new level. The late Alombe Brath from Harlem said that Africans in Africa suffer from a deep emotional and psychological syndrome that he called the residual absentee colonial mentality. And that we, on the other hand, suffer from a similar syndrome, but it's the absentee slave mentality. And this is something that if we sit down and analyze what's meant by this, it means that, as Ajamu was talking about, there is a sea change in Africa that's happening amongst the young people in Africa who have begun to recognize that their former colonial masters are part and parcel of the reason why they are in the state of poverty, of hunger, of disorganization and miasma that they are presently in. And that it's their ruling elite, the older generation, who found comfort and wealth from this collaboration with the former colonizers, who seem to be holding them down and holding them back. Okay, now this is a unique phenomena because it's occurring as the U.S. global hegemony is beginning to deteriorate. And so we see how the West tries to play off so-called anti-democratic attitudes and place the opposition party. They'll support one opposition party against the leadership, whether that leadership is progressive or not, just to create the contradictions that will allow them to penetrate that particular society and that particular culture to their own benefits. We know that ISIS was created by the United States, and then the United States turns around and declares a war on terror, a global war on terror against the same organizations and entities that they created. We know that the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi was a project of NATO, France, and the United States. And that led to some of the contradictions that we now have in the Sahel between certain so-called Islamic movements and so-called Islamic terrorists. You see, many of the movements that are classified in Africa as reactionary or Islamist have their roots in the class contradictions and the neo-colonial relationships between the people that comprise that group and those who are in power. If we take Cameroon, for instance, Cameroon is divided along linguistics as well as tribal contradictions. There's an English-speaking Cameroon and there's a French-speaking Cameroon. Who does the French support over the other? Of course, they support the French-speaking Cameroon over the English. Well, does the Anglophones, the British and them, support the English? Not really. So we need to understand, as Ajamu pointed out, these things are not as simple as they first appear. They're not as easily sorted out as they first appear. I mean, if we look at Chad and we look at the regime that's in power there, we see the role that Chad played in the war with Libya, in the Central African Republic, who was the ruling family there for years. If we look at the Sudan, and what's happening in the Sudan. We remember when they talked about the Janjaweed and the murder of Sudanese. What was that all about? It was Arab speaking Janjaweed, you understand, killing non-Arab speaking Africans. But they're all black. So if we're locked just on race and color, you see, we are out of the mix. We don't understand what's taking place. How is it that Kenya sends police and mercenaries to Haiti? Kenya. And now we know what happened with Haiti and France and how they've been impoverished and indemnified by France for over 2 centuries. Okay, but who colonized Kenya? It was the British. You see what I'm saying? So we have to understand the global dynamics of this and how it impacts on us here. And this is why we have to deal with the situation here. When we talk about Cop City, we're talking about them institutionalizing programs that they've been carrying out since the beginning of the Cold War. Israeli police have been training with American police officers since long before the Black Panther Party was even formed in 1966. There's an NYPD office in Tel Aviv, and the NYPD doesn't have any international credentials. It's a domestic law enforcement agency. This is why calling them police is a misnomer. They're armed agents of the state. And the state's racist white supremacy, a subjugation of African people here in the United States, is reflected in its foreign policy. And it's reflected in the dynamics of its foreign policy. So what do? We have black faces in high places. We have a congressional black caucus that we have not challenged, that cannot hold a community talk or a community program to explain to black people what is happening in Africa and what position they're going to take in the U.S. Foreign Relations Committee. The whole face of U.S. foreign policy today and U.S. militarism is black. We have a black a woman who represents the U.S. in the United Nations. We have a black Secretary of State. We have a black Vice President. I mean, how, and so when the world looks at this is a reflection of us. You see, I have a passport of the empire. I have an American passport. What does that mean when I go back to West Africa and America is supporting and undermining the legitimacy of African people? How am I viewed then? What is my role going to be? You see, and we see that when we have something like the year of return recently, we see how dual citizenship is given to the Rick Rosses and rappers and prominent black figures. We have Kenya talking about they're giving out dual citizenship. You can get a Kenyan passport in less than 2 weeks now. Why? Because they intend to pimp and use us and use the class contradictions that have evolved within us amongst ourselves to their own advantages. But most of the people that wind up in Africa, investing in Africa, come from a certain class and in our society. Not everybody can get a passport and fly off to Africa and say, here I am, I'm ready to make a move, I'm ready to do something. There's only a certain class of African people here that are able to do that. Now, what is their political consciousness then? What do they represent when they go to Africa? We have to think about these things. And therefore, I think Ajamu was right on point when he said that we can't just take it for granted that simply because the military now has become more of a historical in this historical moment, more revolutionary than they used to be. Most of the coups in Africa were carried out at the behest of the European imperialists. You know, they were the ones that backed the coups. Now we have officers, young officers, who were trained by Americans who are talking about empowering their people. This has shocked the imperialist nations. This has shocked the French. That's why the French are acting so stupid, you know, and refusing to make certain moves. They're shocked by the fact, man, we trained these guys. Now they're flipping on us. You see? So we need to understand that what's happening globally affects and impacts everything, especially when we talk about things like Cop City and we talk about migrant labor and migrants being used to undermine the black vote in the United States. We got a black cop, a bootlicking Negro, who's the mayor of New York. How did he become the mayor of New York? You think that the black Democrats in New York had nothing to do with this? You see, so we need to be very clear, and I can't keep getting back to this. Activists have to have a clearer analysis and use terms and define things based on our relationship to the white supremacist construct and whose side of the barricades we on. We have a reparations movement in which some people are talking about reparations only for those who can prove that their ancestors were slaves. Well, I got to bring my great-grandmother's footprint in order to get reparations. You see, this is some absurd nonsense, you see. And then you got other folks who believe that reparations is going to come about, that America is going to suddenly wake up and say, mea culpa, we was wrong, y'all deserve reparations. And white folks going to say, yeah, man, get them Negroes everything they want, you know, while we are living in a trailer. While the white working class is being ripped off, and deunionized, and exploited and used in global wars, perpetual wars against their own interests. You see, so we have to be very clear about solidarity, and we have to, most of all, I think right now, challenge black leadership, that's elected leadership, that claims to be progressive, on what their position is around U.S. foreign policy in Africa. And this is one of the reasons why I congratulate BAP for bringing these issues in front of the French embassy in Baltimore, in DC, in New York, bringing our elected officials to say, what, you know, what's your position on Niger? You know, we know what their position is on Israel, don't we? We know what every black representative in Congress right now supports the European settler state of Israel. In fact, when they get elected, the first thing that the Zionist lobby, which is an unregistered agent of a foreign government, by the way, AIPAC and them, the first thing they do is they take the black elected official on a free jaunt to Israel, you see, and show him, see, this is just like back home, isn't it? So you see, we're the ones that's the democracy here in America, I mean, in the Middle East. And these Palestinians are terrorists, and they're meant on destroying democracy in the Middle East. So we need to challenge our black elected officials.
I know that Ajamu got a breakout in a minute. Let's hear from him real quick. I know that, you know, I appreciate, I got the chance to shake Ajamu's hand on Saturday. I don't think I'm gonna wash my hand for a week. He actually recognized me in public. I was like, oh,
no, yeah. Brother, you the leader. So it was a pleasure to get a chance to see you again. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I do have to move out of here because I'm getting ready to do some traveling. But this is a fascinating conversation and a much needed conversation, because whenever we attempt to continue to make these links between the national and the international, raising up a revolutionary Pan-Africanist perspective is important, because as we have said over and over again, to be an effective revolutionary today, you have to understand these relationships. That way you can avoid confusion. There's no notion of abolition of the police force and the prison system. in the U.S. as long as you got the continuation of the U.S. state. And why would the state abolish the frontline defenses they have in terms of those kinds of structures? You know, we got to be serious, folks. You know, if not, then we will inadvertently spread confusion. If we don't defeat this settler colonial state, you know, then basically we just bullshit. Anything else be under that is bullshit. Okay, we got to be clear about that. Okay, so when we talk about raising up an understanding of West Africa, that helps to enhance our understanding of the relationship we have between ourselves in the U.S. and this domestic army we call the police. They both are representing the same objective interest. Okay. And in both cases, they are strengthening themselves to continue this one-sided class war. We have to understand that. And one of the major instruments they are using ideologically and even structurally is what we refer to as the black misleadership class, or this black petty bourgeois professional and administrative elite that they put in place across the country. In all of these cities where we have these horrendous murders of our people by these pigs, 98% of the time they're in cities that are administered by the black misleadership class. Okay, you got black mayors and you got black superintendent of police and this and that. You know, this class element this class struggle we can no longer avoid dealing with. Okay, people talking about I love black folks. Yeah, I love some black folks. You know, I don't love black folks who are our enemy. You can't come to me with no pigmentation politics. All right. You know, and so we don't have this as part of our ideological arsenal. That, and when I say we, meaning people who are trying to organize, people who understand that this is the period of base building, of building independent structures. Then basically we're going to be using language and a framework that inadvertently strengthens these petty bourgeois elements, you know, because they black. Later for that. If you are the enemy, if you work for the enemy, then in fact you are the enemy, no matter what your pigmentation might be. So that's got to be understood. And that's why in the Black Alliance of Peace, we're using this opportunity of what's happening in West Africa to reacquaint people with the existence of these white supremacist structures like the U.S. Africa Command or AFRICOM. We're connecting that to what is happening in the U.S. in terms of how they strengthened the domestic police force using this Department of Defense 1033 program that has militarized these police forces and made them into occupying armies. We make those connections. We have a month of action on AFRICOM coming up in October, where we're going to again continue to demand to push these criminals off of the African continent. We include NATO, and we include all of the forces that have not been invited into the continent. So this is our responsibility to use these opportunities to strengthen organization, to raise consciousness, and to make us more prepared to engage in the fight we have to engage in. We go wherever the masses are, you know, in the churches, in the electoral arena, in the unions, wherever our people are, we go there. Everybody has the responsibility to engage in agitation and propaganda work. Okay, this notion you're going to float above the masses, you know, who are caught up, involved in the electoral process because you're supposed to be a revolutionary. That's some infantile bullshit. Okay, you deal with the people where they are. You know, the value of a potential West campaign, and because of Cornel West and the potential of winning the white people's house, is the kind of issues that can be raised that we take further. We don't need Cornell to advance a revolutionary analysis. We do that. That's our responsibility. Okay, but we have a chance to penetrate some of the bourgeois discourse. Then we do that. Our people are looking for alternatives. That's why they're looking at weird bullshit like supporting a Trump. Trump came to Atlanta when he turned himself in. They organized some black folks out there to cheer for Trump. He comes out out of Rice Street, where we all know where Rice Street is, And he says, a shout out to my people in Vine City and Bankhead. A shout out to black folks. Everybody like, what? I mean, a brilliant move, tactical kind of move, And what do you have on the other side with these Democrats? Look, we got to get serious. These folks are getting desperate, and in their desperation, they get more and more dangerous. So we got a responsibility to get grounded in what is unfolding, to understand these relationships, understand these issues thoroughly. Okay, because it all connect up to us. It ain't no their struggle and our struggle. It's one struggle, and we got a responsibility at the center of empire. But we also have to understand too that the way this is going to unfold is that those shifts are going to take place probably more quickly outside of the U.S. And that unfortunately we've got to prepare ourselves for what's going to happen domestically, which is a strengthening and expansion of a fascistic phase. And we got to have the kinds of structures and organizations that can survive that and actually even thrive in that environment. This ain't no joke, folks. These folks are serious. And we've got to have a equal level of seriousness. In fact, we have to exceed that level of seriousness. They ain't playing. They ain't playing about trying to maintain power. And they show you in Ukraine, they'll even sacrifice other Europeans to maintain their hegemony. And what's happening in the U.S. is my last point. With the targeting of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, with the labeling of people in Atlanta as domestic terrorists, these are reflective of the kind of the extent that they are prepared to go to maintain that hegemony. And it's really incumbent on us to raise these issues to support the fight back. There's no way we should allow them to put 81-year-old Amala Yeshitila in prison, because they have been raising consistently for decades an anti-imperialist perspective that they now say today is being influenced by the Russians. If they put O'Malley in prison, who's next? Some people have identified certain people who might be next, But so we got to get serious, folks. This is a serious moment, a serious historical moment, but it's also pregnant with possibilities of strengthening our forces and advancing our forces. But we got to recognize those possibilities and take advantage of them. But we can't take advantage of them until we strengthen our organizational capacities.
Done.
And on that, I got to run, Africans.
No, it's all good, man. Listen, man, it was great hanging out with you in church on Saturday.
Yes, sir.
Travel safe, and we'll definitely have you back on, ASAP Rocky, as they would say.
And brother Dhoruba, when I get to get home, I'm definitely gonna call you because we got to talk about this thing that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, Africans.
All right, be safe, right, comrade.
All right now.
So our good brother Ajamu had the opportunity to kick it with him. Eugene Puryear, Breakthrough News, Comrade Coco, Comrade Claudia De La Cruz, and others at the Socialist Peace here in Atlanta on Saturday. So it was definitely good to get the brother on today. Dhoruba, how you feeling? You still with me or what?
Yeah, man. I think Ajamu summed it all up, man. I don't know. I don't think I got anything to add to that. Seriously. I think that one of the things that I have to return. I'm returning to West Africa, and I've made it. I made it my intent not to entwine myself with the political elite there in Ghana or in West Africa, as well as maintaining a distance from the expat community there. I think Ghana has the largest African expat from the U.S. than any other country in Africa. And although that may seem as an opportunity for us to to thrive, but I think it's really an individualistic thing, where because the expat community in Africa is not decidedly Pan-African or even progressive. It's very individualistic. It's very bourgeois. It readily identifies with the Ghanaian comprador class. I think it's about an emotional and psychological breaking of chains with white supremacy, and that when you get to Ghana, when you get to Africa, you realize that you don't have to deal with white folks every day. You know, you don't have to look at a white cop every day. But then again, when the police, you see the police there, like in Ghana, they got the same equipment that the militarized police here have. In fact, it's made in America. They're being trained by the U.S. You see, and so they may approach the issue of law enforcement from a different perspective as opposed to managing a colonized people, but they still are affected by the residual absentee colonial mentality, and they do view themselves as above the masses of people. So they rely more on exercise of physical control and power, and thereby instilling fear in powerless people than say perhaps the NYPD does, which has psychological. They're living inside the minds of every black person when they take to the streets. We know what we feel when a car pulls up behind us with the pinball machine lights rolling. We know the feelings that go through us and all of that, all of those things. And so I think that Ajamu was really on point when he said we have to be really serious about this. You know, these crackers will go on killing us and go on brutalizing us because that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. And if we keep calling them police, then we're making a mistake. They're armed agents of the state, and the state is a white supremacist construct. Now, if we just realize that, then what do? We have to build mechanisms of survival. We have to take control of the armed agents in our community. We have to make sure that they work for us and not for them. Because when the guns are drawn, it should be our police who cordon off the community and keep white supremacist terrorists out of our community. It should be our system of survival that kicks in when the lights don't work, when the water is cut off, when all of these things happen. If we think for one moment that all of these natural disasters that we are seeing and FEMA rushes to help all of these communities. I mean, you had an entire community in Maui wiped out by a natural catastrophe. What happens when the catastrophe in the cities and in the black community is not natural but man-made? What happens when they decide that in order to control us and to contain us, you understand, we have to have an ID card to come home or to go to a building in the projects. And who's going to be standing there checking the ID? Huh? The same type of cop that murdered this young woman and her baby. If you look at the physical condition of most of the NYPD today, they got little fat, rotund, young boys, you know, with guns on their hips, you understand, and badges on. And these are police. Before you couldn't get into the police force unless you could run 50 yards without having a heart attack or do 5 pull-ups. You see, now anybody can do it because they're desperate, because these are armed agents of the state, and the more they have amongst themselves that look like us, the more we are deluded into believing that somehow the police in our communities are there because they have our interests and safety at heart. They're not. And I want to say that we can't get involved in this pigmentation politics. We really can't. And I think that what young folks really need to understand is that in many cases, the struggles that they're fighting for today, the struggles that they are fighting for equality and treatment and humane treatment under the law, all of these struggles we fought and won 40 years ago. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1974. Civil Rights Act was passed in 1974. So why are we still fighting about the right to vote and against gerrymandering? We won rent control of apartments and housing. So why we have all of these homeless people, and we're refighting the landlords now who have removed the parameters of rent control and are raising the rents and changing the and gentrifying our communities. These are struggles we already won.
Right.
But because our children and our children's children have no understanding and no analysis and no connection to that history, they fight battles that we've already won. So we're basically going over the same things that we've fought for and won all over again with a generation now that has the disadvantage of technology. And the disadvantage of technology is that it's more difficult to organize people because people don't have a face-to-face relationship anymore. We're on TikTok, we're on the internet, we're able to any knucklehead can do a podcast and spew things that people want to hear and have 1.5 million followers. You see, we have to really understand that the reason why people are on this and like this is because they're basically afraid. They're fearful of doing anything that would bring down the heat of the system on themselves. So they're scared. They punks. And I would say, and I've been saying this for a long time, being a punk knows no gender. It's not gender specific. You could be a female punk, you could be a LGBTQ punk, or you could be a male punk. You could be a gay punk. A punk is a punk is a punk. And a punk is fearful of the oppressor to the point where they will lead their people into oppression and maintain their oppression. You understand? And so I'm of the opinion, I'm a little more to the left, I think, of my comrade who is more astute and measured. I believe that we should not just mourn, we should organize. That's true. That's true. But I believe that the damned don't cry, they get even.
Right on. Listen, we always appreciate, your colorful words. Oh, I would a few years ago we started a coalition called the National Coalition to Combat Police Terrorism, in which you chaired along with our sister, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, and I was the coordinator for that particular piece. The wild thing about it seems like it's needed more now than ever. What are your thoughts on reinstituting it and bringing that thing back? Because I think that at the stage when I think that although the police were murdering and have been murdering us for the last 500 years plus, right? I think that at that particular moment, a lot flew over a lot of folks' heads, because it's like, and I remember the press conferences, a coalition to combat police terrorism. You had to explain what combat was, so on and so forth, in the terms of, the enemy. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on it and how important is a national coalition to combat police terrorism in these days.
Well, I think it's absolutely important. I think that should be a component of a national united front against fascism. Plenty of people ask me what the legacy of the Black Panther Party was, the original Black Panther Party. I'm not talking about the Black Panther Party of Elaine Brown and that crew. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the original Black Panther Party from 1966 to 1971. And at that time, the Black Panther Party, because it was one of the leading African formations on the continent, in North America, and because there was a huge anti-war sentiment in the U.S., and the white students and white activists all across the U.S. Understood that the U.S. involvement in Vietnam was the involvement of an imperialist nature. They understood that they wanted peace and not war. They wanted to dismantle the war machine. They wanted to reconcile America's racial animus. And so the cities were burning every summer, and so the system, LBJ at that time, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the president at that time, launched this war on poverty, launched this Great Society, and that was the seeds. That from that process to co-opt Black power, to co-opt Black militancy, came the Black comprador class that we have today. The poverty pimps of yesterday wound up in the Congressional Black Caucus. Martin Luther King's compatriots who were around him when he was assassinated became the Pied Pipers of Black people into the Democratic Party. Okay, and we have not benefited from that at all. But what we did at that time, we understood that the right and that white supremacy was in disarray, was in confusion after the gains in the South on the civil rights movement, after the rise as Black power began to gain credence amongst students, amongst the lumpen proletariat, unemployed. Black people on the streets were wearing Black power emblems on their hats and black fists on their Afro picks. So in order to co-opt this, in order to bring this down, they came up with the War on Poverty and the War on Drugs and the Omnibus Control Act in the late 1970s. But what we did in order to prevent or inhibit the consolidation of white supremacy after the gains of the civil rights movement is that we call for a united front of fascism. We call for a national united front. And 7,000 to 8,000 activists showed up to build what we call national committees to combat fascism chapters in each major city. And it's telling too, because in retrospect, what we saw was almost 80% of those activists that showed up for this united front against fascism were white. And they showed up to a Black Panther convention that was convened to build a united front against the rise of the militarized police, against the rise or the reassertment of white racist conservatism in the Republican Party. The pushback against the civil rights gains of the 60s was mass incarceration, was the war on drugs and the war on terror. And it was the Black bourgeoisie, the Negro Black faces in high places that supported these omnibus crime control bills, that supported the Clintons, that supported these bills, that wound up putting masses of Black youth in prison. So we need to understand that today it's the same comprador class, it's the same petty bourgeoisie that supports the so-called George Floyd Policing Act reform. You cannot reform the armed agents of the state, as Ajamu pointed out. The armed agents of the state are the police, are the domestic military force that they have to rely on when the masses of working people understand that the government is no longer functioning in its behalf or on its or in their interests, that they have to use force and violence, legal violence, in order to maintain their political power. And this is what's being done to the Black community. We are being given the alternative between between black district attorneys talking about they're going to bring charges against racist cops, and a racist police culture that sees the masses of people, and black people in particular, as their enemy. You see, and how do we rein in these police in the police state? We can't reform them. We have to take power from them. We have to defend ourselves against them. We have to defend ourselves against them. We have to decertify their exceptional status in the community because they're masquerading as workers. It is the police that breaks up working class and workers' union strikes. It's the police. They're not workers. And we have to make that clear. And when we talk about international solidarity, whether it's with the Palestinian people, whether it's with the people in Africa, we have to understand that the role that these political action committees play. We have to understand that AIPAC, the American Israeli lobby, exercises more control and power over our black elected officials than we do. The police union exercise more political control over our black elected representatives than the black community does. But yet and still, AIPAC is not registered as an agent of a foreign government, Israel. The police unions are not decertified and recognized as armed agents of the state who have the power of life and death in their hands. But yet and still, they have a policeman's bill of rights. They're treated with exception whenever they murder somebody. These punks murdered a 21-year-old pregnant black woman, and most that they've got right now is a suspension pending investigation. If you and I were involved in a shooting in the community that killed someone, whether intentional or not, we would be in jail. We would be trying to get an attorney rather than the police talking about no one could talk to them for 72 hours after these incidents because they're traumatized and all of this stuff. Right. So we have to understand that when we come up with slogans like defund the police, that shows that the activists that came up with this slogan are woefully uneducated as to the role of the police in the capitalist, white supremacist America. That if they wanted to talk about anything, they should have talked about community control of public safety of the police. And they should have talked about interrupting the command chain, the political command chain of command between the mayors who appoint police chiefs and putting that instead into the hands of the people. So they should have been talking about decentralization of police, not defunding the police. There's not a politician in the capitalist white supremacist America that is going to sign his or her name to a bill to defund the cops.
Right.
You see? And so just telling you that the people that came up with this idea knew that. And they knew that idea would sound slick, it would sound revolutionary, but it would go nowhere. So all of the energy that we could have taken and used to build a consensus for community control of police and communities was dissipated, was not used. It's like Cop City. We had to wait for the city council, black faces in high places, to sign on to a corporate plot to build a training center in the middle of Atlanta. We had to wait for that. But we couldn't organize for decentralization and community control of public safety years ago when the cops was murdering us, when we had Slick Willie was the mayor, what's his name? Andrew Young and all of them Negroes and them bootlickers down there were mayors. When your homeboy, Killer Mike, was talking all that yik-yak bullshit, you see? Somebody need to, I ain't gonna say that. Anyway, I'm just saying, why didn't we organize community control of public safety? We had ability to put that on the referendum. We could elect them niggas to city council that certified Cop City. Why couldn't we elect the city council that certified decentralization of police? We could have done it. But the so-called hashtag movements, the so-called Negroes who were activists were ill-suited and ill-educated enough or insufficiently enough to bring to the attention of the black community the true role of the police in our community and why they had to be reined in. So now we have Cop City. Now we have a city council that's basically ignoring the masses of people, and they're going to go ahead with their program, and you're going to have your Cop City, and then what you going to say? Then what you going to do? You see?
So let me ask you this. Because, you know, of course, many of our viewers, you know, might be confused when you're saying that, you know, Cop City could have been stopped, you know, or there could have been a fork in it a long time ago. What do you mean by that, number one? Because you're talking about decentralization, and how do we prevent future quote unquote cop cities in places where it hasn't been established yet, in your opinion?
Well, the way we could have prevented it is, like I said, we could have organized. All politics is local. Okay, the police didn't just start killing black folks in Atlanta. The police didn't just stop, you know, help criminal activities, supporting criminal activities in Atlanta. They didn't just start. So we could have gotten, like I said, if we revisited the past, we would have saw that in New York, for instance, we had a referendum placed on the ballot for community control of the police. But it was the union using millions of dollars that opposed this proposal, community control of the police. And they instead floated a counteroffer, which was a civilian complaint review board. And they confused the people leading up to the elections, so that said that if you wanted the civilian complaint review board, if you wanted a community control of police, vote no. And if you wanted a civilian complaint review board, vote yes. Okay? And the people were confused. And they voted for a civilian complaint review board that didn't have any power, no ability to interdict police misconduct and behavior. They had 2 appointees from the mayor's office, 2 from the police unions, and I believe 3 from the community. So you were always going to be outvoted. You were never going to have any type of clout. And so we see that civilian complaint review boards were then replicated everywhere as they killed black folks, because almost every rebellion and every so-called riot in the 60s was a result of police brutality or murder, or the rumor thereof. Every one. Okay? So they knew what would happen if the masses of people really were seriously organized, if that rage was organized into an institutional power that could enforce itself, that could make policing in the community a residency clause, that, you know, a policeman comes out of the academy, he does 2 years probation. If he's assigned to a certain community, a black community, he should live in that community, or at least that probationary period, which meant that the landlords had to set aside housing and stuff for policemen and public servants. Okay, once you start to live in the community that you police, then all of this stuff that the gangbangers that evolved, you know, gangbanging from one generation to the next, where grandpa was a Crip and dad was a Crip and uncle was a Crip, and so I'm a Crip. I mean, when I was growing up gangbanging in street sets, you know, you stopped gangbanging when you were 16 years old. If you were still gangbanging after 16, you was a retard. You was retarded. Who does that? You see, you moved on to a higher level of criminality, if you want to put it that way. You became a stick-up kid, a hustler, or you became something, but you wasn't running around with colors on, repping that this is my hood. I mean, that's some I mean, how is a street in LA belong to a gang when the whole of LA is controlled by a white motherfucking police force? How? What territory are you claiming? Huh? Crackers come in there in force, and you throw your guns all up under the car and shit. Why you about hassling me? I ain't did nothing. Huh? You ain't shooting back. You ain't holding down the hood from. You're not even doing what they do in Brazil in the favelas. You know, at least the cops are scared to come there. They got to come there in force because they know that the gangs there ain't no joke. They just as well armed as they are. You see? So we have to really understand that there are things that we can do. We can put referendums on the ballot to decertify the police unions. You can carry out class actions to decertify the police unions, which would educate the community about the real nature and the role of the police, that would disrupt their culture of racism and white supremacy and violence aimed at us. We can put all that on display with a class action. We could also put on the referendum in our local communities, community control of public safety. And don't think that public safety just means police. Public safety also means public health care. Public safety also means the deliverance of sanitation and educational facilities to the community. All that is about the safety and livelihood of our communities. But the fact that we don't do it and haven't done it is because the energy to do that, activists have dissipated that energy into bullshit struggles around things that really are not aimed at changing the power paradigm between the community, a colonized community, and the white supremacist construct that is America.
No doubt. I want to point a couple things out, or get a little bit of clarity on some things that you said, because oftentimes folks are viewing and they get confused if they don't know certain things. For one, I think I would say around the whole gang situation, because I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, at one point you were considered a quote unquote gang leader, right? So I want to talk about that from a political standpoint, just on what you were saying, because I think that sometimes people say, okay, he talking about some stuff he don't know about. And the second thing is I want to talk about, you mentioned the Black Panther Party, and you talked about the original Black Panther Party being from 1966 to 1971. So for our viewers who aren't certain, because people will take everything, run with it, and go bananas, give us a little bit of clarity if you don't mind.
Well, in relationship to how I grew up in the Southeast Bronx, and that's how I grew up. And the Southeast Bronx had what we would call so-called quote gangs. And I think if people look at the history of African Americans, so-called African Americans, when we moved from the South to the North, to the industrial areas of the North, and to New York and to Detroit and Chicago, it was during this particular migration, this urban migration, that Black street culture and Black gangs really took root. They were a form of protection. They were a form of passage for a lot of young males. You know, that's how we developed the understanding or the nature of camaraderie. That's how we understood that, you know, a lot of times these street cultures and these street sets were our real family. You see, they were the ones that had our back. You know, we were each other's keeper in a lot of respects. And so, you know, the gang culture sort of solidified that attitude, okay? But you know, I was young then, and I didn't have the type of understanding of why Black people were living in the conditions where we were. This is what Ajamu meant by we really have to have political education. We really have to study. How did we get to New York and Chicago, and why? Okay, what brought us there, and at what period of time brought us there, and what was happening in the world that brought us there? Okay, I grew up in the South Bronx, but my mother grew up in Harlem, and Harlem she grew up in was the Harlem of Marcus Garvey, was the Harlem of Malcolm X. So she grew up in a cultural capital of Black America in many respects. You see what I'm saying? And they had gangs back then. My dad was in a gang called the Slicksters. But they weren't about shooting and ripping and running so much as they were about looking slick. They were dressed in their zoot suits, and they would go to the parties and chat up the girls, and they were the best dancers and all of that stuff. So how did we devolve from that to the Crips and Bloods killing each other? You see what I'm saying? And so when we analyze that, when I grew up, yeah, we were gangbanging. Yeah, we was intent on wreaking havoc on those we considered our rivals. So I grew up that way. And I grew up understanding the role of the police, even if I didn't have politics. They were bullies. They were the biggest bullies in the block. They were dogs. You know, they used to grab our ass while we was playing hooky and beat us up in the basement of Fort Apache. I never liked them. I never related to them. And I understood one thing, that they were in that community to terrorize us. They were in that community to exert their will on us. And so when I did become more political, when I did spend a few years, 5 years in prison, and had an opportunity to study and to read and to deal with them crackers in upstate New York and how they treated us, then I understood the role of the police as armed agents of the state, and that they were bullies, and that they were authorized bullies in blue costumes, and that their sole role was to keep us in check, was to exert fear and intimidation into our very families and livelihood. I understood that, and that's why I've been their implacable enemy ever since. And so with this understanding is something that this generation really doesn't have. And the only groups that tended to have this understanding was the lumpen proletariat, was the street culture, were the brothers and the sisters who had to hustle and duck the police, and who saw the police as their enemy, as their adversary. They were the ones that first joined the Black Panther Party. They were the ones that believed in armed self-defense. They were the ones. If we look at Fred Hampton, for instance, even how his story was distorted and told from the viewpoint of the snitch, or the agent, you see, more people have probably identified with the snitch and the agent and his ambivalence than they did with Fred Hampton. That's why they called it Judas and the Black Messiah. You see, we all know what happened in the real Judas and Esau ibn Maryam and Jesus. He betrayed them. Right, he betrayed them to the Romans. That's exactly what that piece of dog shit snitch in Chicago did to Fred. But Fred wasn't a messiah. Fred was an organizer. Fred was in the NAACP youth corps before he was in the Black Panther Party. He was an organizer. When the COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, sought to turn the largest gang, the largest street set in Chicago against the Panthers, so that they would help eliminate the Panther Party, when Fred sat down with the leader of that organization and talked to him, his crew became allies of the Black Panther Party. So we always had an ability and a capacity to relate to the street brothers on the street and the sisters on the street. We were of them. We were part of them. And they understood direct dealings with the pigs. They understood that. They understood that the pigs didn't understand anything else. They didn't understand that or anything else. You couldn't talk to them. You couldn't negotiate with them. You couldn't do anything. The only thing you could do is if they shot at you, you shot back. So they understood that. Very simple equation. So what happened with the Black Panther Party in 1971, as after Huey P. Newton got out of prison, you know, the infiltration of the party, the repression of the party led to certain people in the Central Committee to look at liberalizing and making the Black Panther Party viewed as a less militant organization. And so the party started to move to the right. It started to move away from its initial relationship to the community. And this was unacceptable to many of us on the East Coast of the Black Panther Party who were raised in Harlem, who was raised in Chicago, who were raised in Boston, who was raised in these types of communities. You see, that's because the Black community in Harlem, for instance, came into being quite differently than the Black community in California, which grew and came into existence during World War II in order to service the U.S. Campaign in the Pacific. We loaded the ships there. We came from Louisiana. We came from Texas. They came from those regions that were accustomed to the Ku Klux Klan and racist sheriffs, and that's where they emerged. That's why the Black Panther Party grew, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, that is, in 1966. That's why it sprung up in California and not in New York the same way. Okay, so I said all of this to say that today, all of these young brothers and sisters who are running around killing each other, shooting each other, doing, streaming rap music that glorifies violence against each other, they would be, if there was a political movement, if there was a revolutionary movement, they would be the foot soldiers of that revolutionary movement. But because there is no revolutionary movement, because the idea and the notion of resistance to white supremacy has been diluted and codified into support for the Democratic Party or the system as such, they have no way of being accepted into any type of revolutionary process. Mao Zedong in China, when they had to fight the bandits and thieves who had armies, you had bandits in China that had armies of tens of thousands, and Mao had said that bandits were potential revolutionaries without politics. They had no political understanding of who they were and what their value is. They were soldiers. They were fighters, but they were killing and raping and murdering their own people. And that's the type of situation we have here now. So when the Black Panther Party moved to the right, the gang culture in the cities, especially in California, grew exponentially. Okay? Absent the Black Panther Party, it was the Crips and the Bloods that you got. You see? And then you have the music that came along with that, because every movement has a soundtrack. The civil rights movement in the South had a soundtrack. Okay, the Black Power movement had a soundtrack. Okay, so when you don't have a movement, what's the soundtrack? When you have hashtag movements that are bogus, what's the soundtrack? You see? And it's the soundtrack that a lot of the young kids come up emulating and want to be like and want to emulate. It's those artists. I mean, we've had artists back in the day, although I didn't agree with some of their politics, whether it was Harry Belafonte or whatever, who supported those movements that they believed in. What do we have today amongst these so-called Black billionaires and millionaires that came out of hip-hop? What movement do they support? What politics do they have? So we should understand that we're in this situation only because our enemy has managed to raise an entire generation cut off from their own radical history and their own traditions, their own radical empowering traditions, you see. And because of that, they were left on to their own devices. And then when they throw money at pimping ghetto culture, then you have the Lil Waynes. I heard this Negro say something about white supremacy. He ain't never had nothing to do with him. You see what I'm saying? You have the Jay-Z's, and that's a billionaire now, and all his businesses were successful, so he's investing in art. Okay, and you have this. I'm saying you don't have a movement.
Correct.
And you don't have a serious movement. And absent a movement, the enemy will make one for you.
So
Black Lives Matter. They made it for you. to suck up all of that energy and all of that rage, direct it into demonstrations, and the people that were involved in that were sincere. They believed that they were doing something. They believed that they were going to change things. In fact, you had the Black Congressional Caucus calling Black Lives Matter the legacy of the Black Panther Party, that they were the new version of the Black Panther Party. Now that tells you what them niggas in the Congressional Black Caucus were all about. All they can do is put on a good dinner, once a year and give out awards, So if they had that analysis, and then they would invite, the leader of these hashtag movements to testify in front of their committees, they were perpetuating the fraud that got them there in the first place. So once the money came in, once it became clear that everything was co-opted, then the leadership bounced with the money. They bounced. They just bounced. So with the Black Panther Party, though, it wasn't that easy. So when the party began to move to the right is when the Black Panther Party, those of us on the East Coast, were labeled by the counterintelligence program as the so-called Cleaver faction. But it was clear that this was the part of the Black Panther Party that was still about the real deal. And out of that came the Black Liberation Army. That split in the party, came the Black Liberation Army. And of course, the Black Liberation Army had the politics of class and caste, and understood the real nature of the police, and understood on a very fundamental level that we will not give fair treatment under the law. There would be no justice in America for Black people unless there was an equal distribution of the pay. And so whenever they killed one of us, we did the best that we could in order to let them know that this pain was going to be distributed. If we had Black mothers that had to cry because their baby was killed, your mama was going to cry too, boy. And whether you was Black or white, the tears didn't make a difference. That's the humanity that brings us together. The U.S. didn't leave Vietnam because the Vietnamese negotiated them out. They left Vietnam because body bags became unacceptable. The body bags coming back to America became unacceptable. So they had to sit down at the negotiating table and leave. And while they were negotiating, the Vietnamese didn't stop fighting until they came out of there on helicopter skids. The U.S. didn't leave Iraq. They're still there, by the way. They didn't leave Iraq because they were persuaded to leave Iraq. They left Iraq because it was too costly for the military-industrial complex. It was too costly in terms of the lives of American kids. They made trillions of dollars off of the Afghan war. But the body bags that came home made the struggle in Afghanistan futile. Made it a never-ending struggle, a never-ending war, you see. So I just want to say that white supremacy and imperialism has never exited any place that it didn't have to be run out of first. So that's why our mantra used to be in the Black Liberation Army, blood to the horse's brow and woe to those who cannot swim.
With that being said, may they all drown. The wild thing about what you're talking about right now is we're seeing it played out right now in Niger, with France refusing to leave. Motherfuckers come up in your house, kick their shoes off, piss
I'll turn on the TV and tell you, what? We ain't leaving. And by the way, is that macaroni and cheese ready yet? These crackers are deep, man.
Crackers out of control.
They deep, man.
They don't care.
They don't? Well, they don't. Well, they never got over Algeria. And there's books written on this. They never got over the Algerian Revolution and being expelled from Algeria by the FALN. Okay, never got over that. In fact, the military, the settlers organized their version of a terrorist organization inside of France. that was anti-Charles de Gaulle, that was talking about killing the politicians that lost France, you see. And all during that struggle, the Communist Party of France didn't support the armed struggle in Algeria. They didn't support it, you know. And it wasn't until the Algerians started blowing up cafes in Paris that they left France. That's when they left. And they never got over that experience. That's why you see they never abandoned sub-Saharan Africa. They took control of the economy with the CFA. They made sure that all of those countries held all of their financial reserves in Paris. They made sure that they trained the military, and they made sure that they had the right bootlickers and cowards running the government. They never got over that, and they never got over 1954. Before that, in Vietnam, in Dien Bien Phu, when they were overrun by the Vietnamese people, and thousands of them were taken hostage, or the military were taken hostage after they captured Dien Bien Phu, and the French had to negotiate their return back to France. Of course, the Americans, like a relay of white supremacy and racism, they picked up the baton and they ran with it in place of the French. But they came out of there too on helicopter skids, you see. So we need to understand that white supremacy and imperialism has never, ever given up anything without a fight.
Amen. Hey. Sometimes it takes a swift foot in the ass to get a clear understanding.
Help them along. That's right. I mean, and just on that theme alone, I remember I told you this story how I was in maximum security in MCC, in the federal lockup in New York, with the IRA, with this IRA brother called O'Rourke, right? And O'Rourke was accused of blowing up the yacht of the racist dog Mountbatten, who was supposed to be of royal blood. He was supposed to have been, you know, the big Willie of British imperialism in India and in Ireland and all of this stuff. And he told me, he said in his thick Irish brogue, he said the British never went anywhere that you didn't have to kick them in the ass to get them out of. This was an IRA dude. So I mean, oppressed people know what time it is, you see. And like it says in the, I think it's, yeah, for everything there's a season. There's a season to talk. There's a season to negotiate. There's a season to love. And then there's a season to kick these crackers in the ass.
Okay. With that in mind, and we've gotten this clear direction, this ass kicking season. It is the season of rebellion. We are definitely always happy to have my main man D on board. Dhoruba and Ajamu joined us today. If you're just checking in, go get a late pass, rewind this joint, share it, because we ain't doing this just to be seen, you know what I'm saying, or heard. We're here to spread the good gospel revolution. So we appreciate you all coming on. D, I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we can have you on, you know, in the next 7 to 10 days.
Yeah, well, okay, we'll see. You know, nobody gets out this life alive, brother. So I ain't looking for that. Okay. So I hope to be on your show before that one, before the big dance, the last dance. Anyway, yeah, okay.
We got it.
All right, peace.
No doubt. You checking out my man Dhoruba Bin Wahad. Of course, we had, like I said, Ajamu on earlier, Ajamu Baraka. My apologies to Ajamu because I got the joint late, so I didn't get to put his name in the in his photo up. But definitely appreciate him coming through. We appreciate you all supporting the work we're doing here at Black Power Media. We appreciate you supporting our organization, the FTP movement. You know, shout out to all the good people that's been putting in work behind the scene on that. We're preparing for our 20-year anniversary next year, so make sure you tap into that. Also, you know, we call this RSTV. And one of the things that I loved about our former show, Renegade Culture, was that we were live in studio. And I plan on taking RSTV back live in studio real soon. So if you all would like to support that endeavor, it's a joint scrolling across the bottom of the joint. Help us get in the studio, help us stay here, and help us make this TV live again, or whatever you want to support. We do hit that cash app. We appreciate you all. A lot coming up, a lot of serious work coming up, a lot of serious efforts coming up. Shout out to our folks around the country, around the planet, who are continuously resisting oppression. You know, political education is the key. Keep working out, keep training. You know, again, you know, we're not here just to kick the Willy Bobo. Shout out to the chat, to those of us who are patient. Again, thank you, Manny. Now we make sure y'all share this, trying to get to 30K. We have we're pretty close to 30,000 subscribers here on this platform. It is organic. We appreciate you. Stay tuned. We have a whole bunch of shows coming up on RSTV. I got to run right now. I got another interview, but stay on the right side of the barricades, and we will win in spite of ourselves. Stay ready for revolution.
Sometimes the riot is a quiet one, where the battle is to love yourself and function in society, where voices of reason are muted by anxiety, like gaining notoriety is selling your soul. So we tend to go no deeper than the shallow water level, trying to keep us overhead in the face of all the slurs and the stares, mentally frozen, paralyzed by fear of failure and success. So we lock, stock, barrel, running while it's crumbling. All these towers and they're babbling, but the baby's in the bath and the stash under the bed on my head, spinning from the circles and the puppets and the strings that they pull. Then we move. Reactionary warfare never produces winners on the field. Feeble and foolish. What tools and what weapons are we using? We need some new ones. Real revolution. It's real solutions. Well, we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my enemy. Real revolution.